right. Well, whatever you want to say about Amazon, whatever you want to say about doing calisthenics in the middle of a workday to keep yourself, jazzed. I just relate so much here. You have to wonder whether a lot of this busy shopping is a lot of folks just spending money before they're even going to be getting that money. For example, tax cut dough. Former investment banker Carol Roth and American Action Forum President Douglas Holtz-Eakin. Doug, you know the history on this sort of thing about tax cuts that are coming and people pre-spending it. I've always heard that. I've heard conversely that if they're going to be a hike in taxes or they're concerned about a slowdown that might be pending, that they retrench. What's going on here?
I think you hit the nail on the head, Neil. We've known from past experience that when people anticipate getting a little cash, they go out and they spend it before it actually arrives. The folks who don't have easy access to credit cards and things like that usually don't do their spending until the tax cut shows up. So we'll get a little bit now, and if they pass this bill, they'll get a little more in the spring.
Carol, it's way, way, way too early to judge how this holiday season will shape up. We're always confused, at least I am, by the initial department store sales, the traditional ones where we saw activity decline, I think 3 or 4% over the holiday weekend, but online sales boomed 18%. What do you think it's looking like early on?
Certainly, I think that the early indications are that this is going to be a good holiday season, and it makes sense. The economy is doing well, and there's a lot of pent-up demand. If you think about the last couple of seasons, we had some really warm winters. People haven't bought coats and sweaters and those kinds of things for the last couple of years. So I think that you're going to see some of the things we haven't seen in the past couple of years do a lot better this year, along with the typical electronics. As far as people, though, getting the best bargains, I think they may be spending their cash a little bit too early, and they should be holding out for some better bargains a little bit later.
I always wonder, too, about the Apple effect. Though it's one company, it has a very pricey phone, over $1,000 you want to get. I always wonder with those type of phenomena, Doug, and I might be overstating Apple's influence here, whether it robs sales of other items. What do you think?
Well, I think what you do is you get a big spend at Christmas. Everyone knows that. If there's a hot item, it does tend to bounce it up a little bit. But I think on the whole, it's going to be the fundamentals that drive spending, not a product in particular. And having good, solid fundamentals is the key. I think the U.S. economy is in good shape. There's no downside risk, but it could do better on productivity and real wage growth. And that's the kind of thing they're trying to do with the tax reform.
Carol, do people spend money that they don't have technically yet?
Yes, absolutely. It's one of the hallmarks of the U.S. economy. It's one of my financial rules is that you shouldn't buy things that you cannot afford. But unfortunately, that is not the American way. And people, if they see something that's a good deal, even though they might be spending more than they would have spent if they did nothing else, they still think that they saved money. So that is the hallmark of our economy, and people are going to continue to do it, and probably more this year than in the years past.
Doug, if you don't mind my tapping your Washington brain and all your old colleagues up on the Hill, including Senator John McCain. A lot of people wonder which way he'll come down on this tax cut, which presumably could be voted on sooner than we think. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think in the end, it's more than a tax cut. It's fundamentally a reform of the incentives to invest, innovate, hire people, and pay them better in the U.S. And so ultimately, the choice comes down to, do you prefer the status quo, where we've got stagnant wages and most of our intellectual property and earnings heading overseas, or something that changes those incentives? And everyone knows this has some warts. It's not the perfect bill and never will be, but it's going to be a choice between the status quo and something that's better. And we'll see how he comes down on that.
Carol, if this somehow were not to pass, in other words, something happens, there's a bump along the way, efforts made to satisfy one Republican senator tick off another, and they all of a sudden they're beyond the 2 votes they can afford to lose, then what?
It's a really interesting question. I think that there are 2 different dynamics at play. One of them is the fact that if we don't get it, the market is going to be upset because they've priced a lot of that in, and if it doesn't look like something that could happen, that could impact the market. However, on the other side of that, if we do get that and we do get the good growth, you do also put the market in jeopardy, because right now we have medium growth, low inflation, low interest rates. If we start to get too much growth, we could see interest rates bucking up. Plus, you've got the Fed, the unwinding of the balance sheet. So it may end up having the same effect, even if we do get the tax reform in the end.
Guys, I want to thank you both very, very much.